must say that this is the second talk that I've given us at Berkeley in the last 2 years, now in the same program. And the first time, the entire projector died. And it never recovered. So I actually had to give the talk on the board. So anyway, so today I'm going to talk. So I'm going to use, I come to big data and data science from a different perspective. I am a social scientist. I'm trained in sociology. And so what I try to do is to learn from the data we now have available on many different things, on many different micro-level interactions. I try to learn some of the things, the heuristics, some of the things that, for example, Sam was talking about, some of the user researchers are trying to figure out as well. I try to learn about people. So, and in particularly, in my case, I try to learn about trust and how people learn to trust others, or maybe don't learn how to trust others. And trust is a huge topic, and I mean, in the talks that I've seen this morning, that came out in many different ways. It's also a big topic, a big issue in the space of sharing economy. Many of you are familiar with the label of sharing economy, but just to give you just some of the names that. Some of them are here. Actually, this is an old slide, but you know, Airbnb, Uber, Couchsurfing, TaskRabbit, and you see actually it's a space that has changed quite fast. Half of these companies don't exist anymore. And this is like just 2 years old. TrustCloud, I was involved with TrustCloud. They folded. I hope it's not because of me, but they're no longer around. So it's a huge space. It's a market space as well. And we're collecting a lot of data at the individual level on how people interact and how people interact with strangers, right? So this is a type of data that social scientists like me 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we're dreaming of, right? We had kind of big data, but census kind of big data. No data on how strong is your friendship, or no data on, I just met this stranger, I'm going to rate him. And definitely we didn't have even the census doesn't have the level of details of some of the data. So it's a big market space. It's also a social space, and that's what I want to show you here. This is an old video that a collaborator of mine did on Couchsurfing users in San Francisco. So this is a period that goes from 2011 to, I'm sorry, to 2003 to 2011, and it's monthly data, and these are friendship ties that Couchsurfers in San Francisco developed throughout these 8 years span. And you can see there are the ties. These are friendship ties, self-reported, and they're blue and red. Blue are pre-existing friendship ties, as in two Couchsurfers joined Couchsurfing and then reported that they were friends from outside. So like you joined the gym, and this person, you knew this person from the outside, from before joining the gym. And the red ties are instead two people that met because, in this case, of Couchsurfing. And as you can see, the red ties are bridging the different clusters. If I replay these, you will see the convergence of these different clusters into the center. The geographical space, this doesn't mean anything. It's not mapped to geography of San Francisco. We could have mapped it, but it's not mapped. And what is interesting here is that this shows that, in this case, Couchsurfing, but I'll show you later about Airbnb, maybe something about Uber. They are not just market spaces. They're also social spaces where people form friendships. And so that's, and some of these, the final thing that I would say about this video is that the thickness of the ties, is how strong that friendship is. Self-reported. I don't remember the scale on top of my head now. I think it was 1 to 7, with 7 the strongest. And here we averaged. So if you see a thick tie, that means stronger ties, stronger friendship, this one versus this one, right? So this is a space. This, again, was Couchsurfing, San Francisco, during this period. It's a space where not only people do economic transactions, but it's also, for certain platforms, becomes a space where people form friendships, and some of them are strong friendships. Now, trust is a key component of how you form friendships, right? So this seems pretty straightforward. I don't have to argue too much about that trust is a component of friendship. And so here is, I want to show you a little bit, just one slide, about how the theory behind this trust analysis that I'm going to show you the results. This is not honestly just my theory, but it actually has been developed by many people. Some of them are actually here at Berkeley High School, Corey Cheshire, for example. So differentiating between trust between people, between users, the ties that I show you there, versus trust toward a given company. In that case, it's Couchsurfing, or now I'm particularly interested in trust toward Uber, although I'm going to show you some data about Airbnb, because prior to joining Uber, I did a research project with Airbnb as well. So here you can see two components of trust. Trust in another person that you don't know, and the trust that both of these people have on the platform, on the company. Now, I think that also trust is contextual. That is, the trust that you may have on when you take an Uber. I bet many of you, I hope, have taken an Uber to get here to solve traffic problems. The trust that you have in that particular Uber driver maybe is enough for you to engage with the platform. It's also a very contextualized experience. It's there in the car, and usually for a short period of time, right? 10 minutes, 5 minutes, depending on traffic. It's quite different from the trust that you will need to have, for example, when I show you the Couchsurfing data. That's a different context where that trust, potentially, it requires a bit more trust, right? You're going in the house of a perfect stranger. Airbnb, maybe it's in between these two things. Couchsurfing was particularly, especially the period of analysis that I studied, was particularly intense in the sense that it wasn't even, at that time, a for-profit. It was just purely kind of gift exchange type of economy. So it's contextualized by which I mean that the trust that you have in Uber or in the driver, or if you're a driver, in the rider, not necessarily will translate in a trust that you have overall toward every people, right? So with these premises, I want to show you two things. And all of this comes from my work prior to joining Uber. One is the relationship between interpersonal trust and trust in the platform, which is what I just showed you the theory about it, and then how to grow trust. And this first part is very few slides on the work that I did with Couchsurfing, building up on those networks that I showed you. And the second one is an online field experiment that we ran with Airbnb users. So I'll show you these two results. So the first one, this is the data from Couchsurfing. That's what we were looking. We analyzed this data, which pretty much covers the same period that I show you in the video, not just for San Francisco, but for the entire world where we had, the entire US Couchsurfing world at that time. And this is how they rated friendship ties. What is interesting about this is that early on, we saw that Couchsurfing was a platform where you had very strong ties. I'm breaking this down into many different strengths, but actually, to make an analytical point, probably I should have broken into fewer strengths. So this is a strong tie. And then at the very beginning, the friendship, so think again about that video. At the very beginning of the network, the friendship ties that they were forming between these strangers, so the red ties in those networks, they tended to be strong. But the more the network grew, the weaker those ties became. There are many confounding here, so I'll briefly talk about that. But we were interested on that. We were interested in how these friendship networks changed from strongly dyadic, so think about here interpersonal trust, toward weaker ties. And the network was growing, so there was greatly increased trust in the platform, in this case, Couchsurfing. And so here I'm giving you some qualitative data that comes from all interviews, not done by me or by my collaborators, but by others that we quote. And you can see, if you read the quotes, that this was, Couchsurfing was a world where strong bonds were formed. And people talked about transformative experiences because of being part of Couchsurfing. This was around 2006, 2005, so early on in the life of the platform. Now, from there, then the platform grew and evolved toward becoming more stronger community bonds. So if you want trust in the platform. And here you can see Couchsurfers articulating how they decided where to go, how they decide with whom to become friends. And you can see that they talk about checking references, looking at the ratings. Indeed, actually, there's a very interesting New Yorker articles a few years ago, 2013, 2012, where one of the New Yorkers report uses Couchsurfing and describes her experience with it. And it's pretty funny because it actually shows in very details how much the rating and review system, how much information that system had accumulated on each person that you were going to meet. So that you could have chosen, oh, I want to meet this person because he likes or she likes rock band and I don't know, this type of food. Very specific. So this is a world where there's fewer information about the strangers that you were going to meet. And this is a world where there's a lot of information about the strangers that you want to meet and that you're going to meet. And what I'm trying to convince you of is that in this world, the bonds, trust is very interpersonal. And in this world, the trust is very much, it's more toward the platform, in this case, the company. And here is essentially what I said. This is the number of prior experiences of the current partners. So this is, for each prior experience, there is pretty much one-on-one reference left. So imagine the information about this person. Oh, this person is great, or this person is really not that good. And you can see that early on, the first 20 months, on average, it was a very little experience. It's like 1, 0. There's a lot of uncertainty in that world. So the people who use that platform form strong friendships. But then, with the passing of time, the review system, the rating systems accumulate information. And then we shift into a regime of high informations prior to meeting that person. So when you meet that person, you kind of know already something about it. And you trust the review system because of the information accumulated. So we ran this is essentially a logic model, multi-logic model, with partial odds to deal with some problems, some statistical problem that we had with that model. The details of these are not that important. What is interesting, however, is that it's showing the relationships between the amount of information that you have prior to the partner you were going to spend time with and the strength of the ties. And so the analytical takeaway of this is this, that the more information you had, actually, you needed a certain amount of information to have that chances of a tie to form. But that beyond a certain point, that extra information was decreasing the strength of their relationship. So this is to suggest that the more information you accumulate, the more information the platform was accumulating, the more the trust shifted from interpersonal to trust in the company. The more, and the reason for that is quite potentially, I don't have the data for this, but it's quite intuitive to understand. In one world, you're meeting with a perfect stranger, there's a risk involved, and if it goes well, it's that stronger of a bond. In the second case, you meet with somebody of which you have already some expectations. And so the expectations allow you to form that relationship, but at the same time take away something of the serendipity, if you want, of meeting a stranger. So here is a relationship, I think, between interpersonal trust and platform trust. If you increase too much one, then it comes at the expenses of the other. So this is work that I did with Couchsurfing. Now, to shift gear, I'm going to show you instead some experimental results on how to grow trust, if it's possible to grow trust. This is a bold statement, I must say. We ran an experiment, an online field experiment with with Airbnb users. I don't have to tell you what Airbnb is, so I'm going to skip on that. So that's what we did. In partnership with Airbnb, we invited about 100,000 users. That many registered on my website, and each participant played an investment game with 5 other Airbnb users. I'll tell you in a second what the investment game is. And then the prize was $10,000 in prizes that Airbnb put money into, and we were divided into 100 prizes of $100. So that's the setting. The investment game. So these people came to my website. They played the investment game. The investment game is a way to study interpersonal trust. Let me give you some ideas of some very quick information about the investment game. It's a single-shot game. It has a property. Sorry, actually, I thought. I'll show you. I thought I had a slide. One slide is missing. So the investment game is very simple. We'll give you, imagine that you get $10, and you appear with another person, and you don't know at all this other person. You have no information about this other person. You have never met this other person, and most importantly, you have no expectations that you are going to play the game with the same person again in the future. That's not the case. It's a one-shot game. You have $10, and the only thing that we tell you is that any amount of dollars that you decide to invest in this other person will be tripled and given to that person. $10, if you invest 5, the other person receives 15. And that other person, the recipient, has a choice to return any part of this $15. Can return 0 if it's not cooperative, can return half of it, can return if it's fair, or if it's a very, even more than very nice person, returns more than half, let's say $10, right? So that's the setting of the game. It's a single shot. The dominant strategy is actually very simple to show. The Nash equilibrium is no investment. Why will you invest, right? You have no expectations that this person will, you don't know this person. Now, most humans actually invest. So the experimental design, there were investors and recipients as Airbnb users, and this is, you have a chance to win $100, and the recipients got 10 cents for each credit that they accumulated. So there is an incentive for the recipients to accumulate credits. Now, there are 2 roles, however, and then we created the illusion for the players that they were randomly selected as the role of investors. So you'll come to a website and will say, oh, you're being randomly selected to be an investor. However, that was actually an illusion. All of them were playing investors. And the recipients were bots that we coded accordingly to certain characteristics that I will show you in a second. So there's only one role, although if you play this game, you thought there were 2 roles. So what are the information that we coded? We collected gender, age, state, as in the state where people lived, and marital status. These are, for each players that came to the website, we collected these informations. We also have other information that Airbnb had collected on them prior to. This is a random sample that Airbnb gave to me. We have very good accuracy, etc. So here is what it looked like. You had a player, and you had a recipient. So you will be this person. These are the informations, and there's a recipient. We will pair you with recipients, and we ask you how much points you will invest, right? Remember, your goal is to win this $100. So you want to be conservative, kind of, and you think that the recipient has an incentives to keep the money. Now, here, you notice that it says D equals 0, the socio-demographic distance 0. What does that mean? These are some of the conditions that we use. So you were paired with 5 different recipients at different distances. And the distances are organized in this way. Distance 0 means that that recipient was completely similar to you in all the characteristics that you gave data as on. So if you reported male, 40 years old, living in California, distance 0 is 41, so to introduce some randomness. But and California and male. Distance 1, we flip one attribute by random. So it could have been age, could have been location, it could be marital status. We flip that. Distance 2, we flip a second characteristics at random. There's no distance 3 because we don't have enough power for that. We thought we had no power. Probably we had this number of people. But distance 4 and distance 5 are the same in terms of being completely different from you. So this person is completely different from you. But there's one thing that varies between the two. That distance 5 has a worse reputation than you do. So if you can see 5-star, and the other one had 4-star. And here is how it looks. Everything is randomized, so it's not that you always see the distance 0 first, etc. And you put 100 credits. You can allocate the 100 credits any way you want. You can also keep the 100 credits for yourself. You can put 0, 0, 0, 0, 100, 0, 0, 0, all the possible combinations. So we study the two scenarios. This is world 1. And as you can see, this is not surprising. The recipients that looks the most similar to you gets the most investment. This is kind of depressing a little bit. And the recipient that is the most different, 5, gets the least amount of investment. It's also the recipient that have the worst reputation. So this is world 2, where in this case, as before, but it's better reputation. And here what happens, which is actually quite interesting. This is why Airbnb loved this study. It was surprising. You can see the same monotonic decline for the baseline reputation, but a huge premium on the recipients that was very different from you but had a better reputation. So this is something to say about reputation systems and the 5 stars, 4 stars. This is an endless debate, even at Uber now. Do they mean anything? Apparently, people, all of us, attach some meanings to these ratings. So I think I'm going to probably cut short this part here. This is some validation that we did. And so this is actually interesting. So we actually looked at other characteristics. We have a very rich data set. And we looked at what other characteristics determine the investments. And we ran some Elasto model to identify potential characteristics of the subjects. You can see this, so it's not symmetric. Not married tends to invest less than married. Male invests less than females, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that was interesting was that risk was very much correlated with the amount invested. And here is the risk question. You can think about this and think about where you are, how much you are a risk taker. So here's the question. A lottery ticket costs $100. You win 50% of the time. How much should the price be for you to choose to buy a ticket? So this is a way that we use how to measure risk. And it's actually very well correlated with the amount invested. In this case, we actually look at our robot at distance 5. And it's a monotonic decline again. So going in the interest of time, I'm going to go faster. So my work at Uber, unfortunately, I can talk about it. I know. We are, hopefully, if you invite me next year, 6 months from now, I'll be able to say something. But right now, we can't really talk too much about it. Here's the conclusion. So sharing economy websites are social spaces that facilitate interactions among users. So when you use these websites, and many of us do, including Uber, think of them not just as pure economic transactions, but it's the social spaces where people form relationships. Trust is a key element of how people form these relationships that I study in Couchsurfing, I study in Airbnb, and you need to trust me that it's also in Uber. The reputation systems of this website and the accumulation of information about users facilitate interpersonal trust, but up to a certain point. That is that there seems to be a trade-off between how much trust you put into the other person dyadically, and how much trust instead you put into the company. It's not a function that adds up directly. It's more like a more complex function, if you want. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. You can ask him anything you like. There's no guarantee he's going to answer. Any reactions, reflections? I want to find out a little more about that work. I love it. All right. Thank you. We got one right here, too. Oh, there's a question there? Let's go there first. Thank you.
So thanks for the talk. It was very interesting. The question I had was with respect to the graph that looked kind of like a normal distribution about the amount of trust. What did you have to control for in terms of the variables? Were there any confounding variables that you considered?
Yeah, so we looked at the experience on the website. We have a covariate for the time, so the month, because there's a growing number of people joining at that time the platform. We consider triadic closure, like a friend of a friend, then the two friends become friends, right? So we wanted to kind of take that into account. We looked at whether age, similarity in age, how close the pair was. We also looked at different types of ties, not just ties as in somebody traveling, but also as in Couchsurfing used to have events, local events. So whether or not the friendship was because of a local event instead of traveling. Yeah, these are all the covariates that I think we controlled for.
Thanks. That's good. Pass to Joseph there. Thank you.
So I was just kind of curious about the way that you decided on the distance metric that you used. And so two questions. One, the interface that the person had when they were investing, was it actually anonymized except for that data that you showed?
It was anonymized. Yeah, it was completely anonymized. You had no names, nothing, information. We built the distance metrics using a theory that comes from Peter Blau, a sociologist. He talked about the Blau. In fact, there's something called the Blau space, and the idea that people can be identified and located in the Blau space depending on how many characteristics they have in common, or they can be closer or farther away from you depending on the characteristics that they have. So we try to create an operative definition of that space, and that's how we created those distances. Now, it would have been great to have also other characteristics, such as race, for example, such as education, they proved, this was a collaboration with Airbnb, so some things were a bit more difficult to negotiate.
Did you get a chance to check for the relationship between like different states? So instead of just it being a state not yours, one that isn't adjacent or is?
Yes, yes, we did. So the way how we, so in the distances, one of the attributes that could actually change was actually state, but it wasn't at random. So if you were California, we will consider the neighboring states of California to be in the same region. So if it was a different state, then it must have been either New York or the East Coast or the South. That was a way for reducing some of the variability in the data. And we didn't look too much about into the geographic pattern of this data. I remember, however, not to make a joke about Florida, but there was the trust. When I looked at the trust, how much people invested that were playing the game from Florida, it actually was lower compared to other states in the South. I don't know why. I have no idea, but maybe just correlation, spurious relationship.
So northerners down in Florida.
It's the New Yorkers, right? But it's the older New Yorkers that are coming down. But
Okay, yeah, we'll bring the mic down here, take a question there, and then we'll go back there. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, that was super interesting.
Thank you.
I was just kind of thinking about if you combine the two studies, if you have any guess on whether that kind of normal curve would hold based on whether the people were very similar or not, or learned that they were more similar or less similar based on the amount of information they got?
That's what I'm trying to do at Uber. I want to combine the two. Yes, I'm trying to do that. I don't know. So my intuition now is that indeed, and this is actually, I mean, it makes sense that the more we trust a third party, in this case the platform, the company, the less there is need of dyadic trust, of bonds between two. So there has to be a trade-off. I would like to be able to quantify that trade-off. I'm not in a position to do that yet. But that's my goal, and it makes sense, right? The trade-off is, on one side, too strong of dyadic bonds can fragment a community into cliques, and so then you don't have the larger good. And however, the other side, too frail of dyadic bonds can make the community too vulnerable to not strangers, but to threats, to external threats, for example. So you kind of want to find the optimal point. And I don't know where the optimal point is. I think it's contextual. So even if I find that optimal point for Uber, won't work. I don't think it will work for, let's say, Airbnb or Couchsurfing or any other of these communities. But yeah, I think the functional form is that. But I don't know where that point is.
Thank you. Just a question there.
Thank you. So this is sort of a two-part one. So first of all, did you try the investment experiment on non-Airbnb users to see if people who were sharing the economy are fundamentally different in some way than people who chose not to?
I did with Stanford students as a tryout. It worked out, and yes, but not on that scale, right? So it was a small, convenient sample.
Okay, the second part of that is, do you think these relationships are changing at all as we've sort of normalized the sharing economy in everyday life in a way that we really hadn't 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, definitely we have become more accustomed to the rating systems, the 5 stars rating systems, right? So I would say yes. I don't know. So it's possible that some way how, because of the rating systems and the expectations that we form around meeting strangers online and then in person, it may be that has an impact on how we meet strangers, period, right? Not just through online mediation. If so, I'm not sure if that it is the case, but if it is the case, we will see potentially a trend emerging in the coming years, the younger generations, my kids, for example. I think that this 5-star rating seems pretty ubiquitous now, and has no research backing besides the fact that eBay used it 20 years ago. And so then everybody else started using it. Now, I also show you that actually people give some meaning to that. It's not that it's, even if it was 5-star was a random thing that came up with, people are still attaching meaning to that. And that's because this is a social space. It's not just a marketing space.
Time for maybe a couple more questions. Yes, in the front here.
Hi, my name is Derek.
Just wait for the mic there, Derek. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Derek. I see you have a citation of social psychology up there.
Yes.
In World 1, I've seen studies from Stanford on positive value affirmation, and that seemed to be the case, where if the rating was higher for the person themselves, they would rate or give to people similar to them, right?
Yes, yes.
So what is the rationale for the opposite case, the World 2? Is it as simple as negative value affirmation, something deeper than that? The reason I ask is that your clever experiment here actually has given me an idea for a variant, but I want to do it in a different domain on violence. So if people, maybe in the framework of who do you think would be least violent towards you? And so if a person is choosing someone the opposite of them, with that, what would that reveal about
That's interesting.
the person themselves?
Sure. No, that's a great question. There's more that can be explored on the data that we collected, so I would love to talk more about it. And that reference is outlined this methodology that we came up with, a little combining different things that we call online field experiment. But the way how we interpret that increased trust, if you want, when the reputation was different, was as trust in the company. That because the users, the Airbnb users, trust Airbnb, then they are willing to place that trust on the person that is completely different, yet has a better reputation. And to support that, one thing that I didn't tell you is that the way how we make the reputation vary essentially was between having 4 stars and 5 stars. So we may think, oh, that's nothing, right? 4 stars, 5 stars. But all of this effect is between 4 stars and 5 stars. So it's not that the lower reputation is like 3 stars or 2 stars or 1 star. No, we eliminated that because, again, there's too much variation, and we couldn't. This allows us to see the potential effect of 1 star, or at least to go from 4 to 5 stars. So this makes me thinking that it's trust in the platform, although some of the things that you mentioned could be, be interesting to extend the design.
Okay. Any final questions? Yes, sir. Just behind you.
Maybe a little hypothetical, and I don't know if you can comment on it, but as Uber sort of pushes into like autonomous vehicles, like how do you reconcile the work that you've been doing around trust with like transactional measures that you might capture after having a ride in a vehicle that's not driven by a human anymore? Like,
yeah.
Do you have you done any or produced any research in that domain?
I sign even more NDAs about that. So.
Well, I figured.
Well, so it's a good question, right? And indeed, but think about, so it seems to me that the trust, perhaps with the autonomous, this is hypothetical, and with the autonomous vehicle, there's less of a trust in the interpersonal, right? In the other person in the car, because maybe there's not going to be a person in the car, or maybe there's going to be another rider in the car. But what is going to become even more salient is the trust that you place in the company, in this case, in Uber. Right? And part of that will be how you interact with the autonomous vehicle. That's the key point now, how you interact with the autonomous vehicle. And if you think about the type of research that in that space, the autonomous vehicle is essentially a robot released in the wild, right? And we don't have a lot of data right now for many experiences of this. And there's questions about moral dilemmas. There is questions about what kind of instructions you give to the car. will the car, will it follow the instructions you give? Or will it think about will it override your instructions because it's not safe to stop on the highway and get off the highway, right? So there's a lot of things. But all of these, if anything, seems to me, part of that is not my work as a social scientist working on trust, right? But if I had to cut the angle there for my work in this, would be how much trust you have in Uber and in the company. Because you're giving those instructions to a machine that the company is running.
Fascinating question. Thank you. And such a great area for further research. So appreciate it, Paolo, for sharing it with us.